France 24 debate. Now, les vacances have arrived, and just like their countrymen, French political leaders are closing shop for the sleepy month of August. François Hollande has been president now for a little under 3 months. Earlier this year, he, of course, became the first socialist to win the Élysée since François Mitterrand was elected in the 1980s. You'll remember this. Hollande's soggy inauguration ceremony back on that rainy day in May. Well, has the French public been any kinder than the weather was that day? Let's take a look at this. This is Hollande's latest approval ratings as compared with predecessor Nicolas Sarkozy 3 months into his presidency back in 2007. There you can see an 11-point lead for Sarkozy. Well, that, of course, though, was just a few weeks before the world financial crisis kicked off. Hollande came to power vowing to fight the European trend for austerity, prescribed, of course, by the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. But has he been able to stick to his guns? Well, that's among some of the topics I'll be discussing tonight with my panel. They are Gregory Viscusi. He's a reporter at Bloomberg News. Also with us here in the studio is Denis de Montpion. He's editor-in-chief at Le Nouvel Observateur. Also in London tonight, John Gaffney is a professor of politics at Aston University. He's also the author of The French Left and The Fifth Republic. We're also expecting a fourth guest, Pierre Rousselin at Le Figaro. As I say, it is les vacances, so he will be here when he gets here. Now, let me start with you, Denis. Let's talk about today's budget, or the revision of the budget. In this, we can clearly see the government's opposition to austerity because we've got, what, more than €7 billion in extra taxes, very little in the way of cuts to government spending. Given that the government needs to find €30 billion by next year, some might find this a little surprising.
But, yeah, no, well, it could be surprising for some people. But anyway, it is a first step because, you know, as you recall that Hollande has been here for less than 3 months. He started by trying to repair, in a way, what Nicolas Sarkozy did previously. This is, you know, have a bit more justice in the budget too, in order to make rich people, who actually at one point said they should, you know, pay more taxes by citizens. So obviously that the government of Hollande started by that, and that doesn't mean, you know, it's the end of the story, because they are going to have a few weeks holidays, and obviously it's in September, probably even end of August, that we'll have a new row of probably announcements.
So for now, this budget makes sense to you.
Yeah, I think it's quite it's cautious, you know, anyway, because it is in the style of Hollande and Hero. They've been cautious right from the beginning. It's a quite different type of way of doing politics compared to what we had before, and they don't want to hurt too much because they know the crisis is deep, and they don't want
austerity is, after all, interdit at the Élysée right now. It
has always been, anyway, for a long time now.
Let me introduce our fourth guest tonight. Pierre Rousselin is Senior Editor of Foreign Affairs at Le Figaro. Good evening to you. Thanks for being with us. I'll be getting to you in a moment. But Greg Viscusi, if you could just come back on that. Does the budget make sense to you today?
Well, I think you have to distinguish the fact that the budget today is just sort of a corrective budget for a year that's already underway, and the numbers are quite small. They needed to come up with €6 or €7 billion, I think, to close the gap. As you say, next year it's when they come back from holiday and start preparing the 2013 budget, and next year they're talking about needing 30 billion, as Denis said, to close the gap and to meet the promises that they've made to the European Union. You're going to see a completely different budget then. I mean, right now it's a few easy things. It's always easy to raise the wealth tax, raise a few taxes on wealthy people. Next year they have sent orders to all the ministries to cut their spending by quite a huge amount. So I wouldn't judge his policy based on just a very quick corrective budget that they had to rush through.
All right, John Gaffney, who's with us in the UK tonight. The government needs to find €30 billion worth of savings next year. Currently, French public debt almost 90% of GDP. Compare that to Greece, which is 120% of GDP. Should they be getting on with it a bit here?
The French are beginning to think that possibly they are taking an awful long time getting things going. It's true that, as the other speakers have said, really everything will start in September, but that's part of the French system, that the president gets elected in May, then there's time before the legislative elections, and the legislative elections are there to give the president a majority. Then they bring in some of the points that were on the president's programme, and then everybody goes on holiday. So really 3-4 months will pass before, or have passed, before the real budget kicks in. The budget that's just been passed, and some of the measures that have preceded it, were really points that François Hollande had put on his presidential programme, and so people were expecting a raising of the minimum wage and a range of other things, and now this kind of quite heavy taxation on the rich. The French don't really mind this. I mean, there is a kind of a sense of we are in a difficult position, and therefore taxing the rich is one of the ways forward. And that's, I think, most people accept that. What will really test this government from September is not the measures that they've passed now, which generally speaking, it's okay, that's fine, we don't mind these things, but are you going to make France competitive? Are you going to bring in the structural reforms necessary, because you are not going to raise £33 billion or billion euros by just taxing and spending. And therefore, between now and September, or at the beginning of September, when Parliament starts again and the political process starts again, that's when the real judgment will come as to whether Hollande and his government have got a grip on a situation that is probably going to get an awful lot worse.
Pierre Rousselin at the Figaro. Your thoughts? Is François Hollande putting off the painful reforms that economists argue are vital to get the French economy going again?
Yes, yes, and he's been doing the easy things, and you know it's kind of problematic for a government, a new government that has just come in, to start by doing the easy stuff and leaving the hard stuff for later, because one would imagine that he would start by the difficult things, just by the fact that he's enjoying the popularity, coming out from his victory in the polls. So he's only been doing very easy things. To tax the rich is not very difficult, as it has been said, and there are more people who are not being taxed and who are enjoying the fact that the others are being taxed. So that's not, politically, it's not very difficult. And what you've been saying and other people have been saying is in September, things will become much more difficult, because we will have to, the government will have to touch entitlements and things that his own constituency are very keen on, and this is going to be very difficult. What I don't understand is why there wasn't a mix of both things, just in order to say, okay, we've been doing this, but you have to make sacrifices. It seems to me very dangerous politically.
I don't think that it's the easy thing to tax the rich, as you said, because the right, when Hollande mentioned that he would charge 75%, the rich over 1 million money, then there was a threat that they would all go and cross the channel, go to England, and in fact nothing of the kind happened. Where
David Cameron was rolling out the red carpet.
Yeah, exactly, but nothing happened of the kind.
Well, because that hasn't taken effect yet. I mean, the 75% thing is not in this corrective
budget.
budget.
Right, but they've already announced that they would have to pay a bit more just now in order to cover these 7.2 billion.
I think it's too early to know whether or not wealthy French people are leaving the country. I mean, there's anecdotal evidence. We haven't really seen the statistics. I think it's too early to judge.
And
I don't think we can make that.
Let's remind ourselves of the figures. I mean, Hollande brought in the 75% tax.
Well, he hasn't brought it in. He's not brought it in.
He's bringing in a 75% tax. He's flagged it up, hasn't he?
And let's see how it's good. Let's see how it's going to go. I mean,
75% if you earn over $1 million.
If you over $1 million, but they've been making noises that it's if you always recurrently make over $1 million, because what they don't want is that some struggling artist has their one great hit, has 1 year, and you take all their money away. They want to avoid that. So we'll have to see the details on that.
I want to talk about this It's loosely called the Tobin tax. Finance is my adversary. That's what François Hollande said before he was elected. And France has now become the first EU country to impose a tax on financial transactions. Now, supporters of this say it will bring in revenues for the government and it will ease speculation that causes volatility. Critics say it will just put people off investing in French companies. Where do you stand on this?
It's pretty minor what they've done. I mean, they've only come in with a tax on equities, which is kind of bizarre because, I mean, part of the whole ideological reason for this tax is to control speculation. Well, and you know, the speculation that led to the financial crisis. The equity market was the one market that contributed nothing to the financial crisis. So they're not taxing derivatives, they're not taxing, you know, credit default swaps because these things are way too complicated to tax. They've gone for an easy thing, which is to tax share transactions. But you know, the British have that already. The British have stamp duty on shared transactions. So there's nothing particularly radical or innovative or that original about what they're doing here, and it's kind of hard to understand. You know, they're really selling it. They're selling it as something that it's really not. This transaction tax. It's a very limited thing.
But does this show that the government is prepared to go to war with the financial markets, which Hollande has said many times that's what he wants to do?
He's too clever to do that. I mean, it's very likely that he would, first of all, discuss with them before, you know, taxing too much, because he knows fairly well that he can't, you know, anyway do any politics if he's got, you know, the MEDEF against him and the finance against, you know, it was just an electorate, you know, argument when he said, you know, he didn't like the rich. You know, he said that during the campaign, but obviously he's very realistic and pragmatic, and he will probably, you know, try to measure, you know, the impact of his decision.
Do you think this government has a troubled relationship with business, though? I mean, looking at the case of Peugeot just last week, I mean, we saw some pretty vitriolic attacks between the Minister for Industrial Renewal, as he's called, Arnaud Montebourg, and the CEO of Peugeot. We saw a lot of government intervention in that company. Do you think that there might be problems down the road?
Yes, there are problems, but part of it is theatrics. I believe I agree with Denis. I mean, part of it is politics, and at the end of the day, this government, I believe, I hope, will be more pragmatic than ideologist. Even the minister you mentioned, who is the most outspoken and the most ideologue of the whole group, but. When things matter, you know, they will have to take into account the realities of the situation, and I think this will happen.
Montebourg's a big mouth, and every time he's made a statement like this, he quickly gets reeled in by the president, by the finance minister, by the labor minister. So, you know, I think there's a bit of good cop, bad cop going on in there.
Peugeot has been forced to scale back its plans. I mean, they came out with this €800 million loss. They said they had to make the layoffs. They had to close the Aulnay plant to keep the company viable. Now that's being scaled back, isn't it?
Same thing used to happen under Sarkozy. Really, there's no change. The same thing used to happen every time there were big company announcements. Sarkozy would throw a fit, and then the company would scale it back. I think it's all part of a dance and a negotiation tactic. That's just part of how French companies have to run.
John Gaffney, what's your view on that?
I think. Parts of, I mean, in the way that the government, well, let me just say that I agree with the speaker who said that Hollande is a pragmatic and an intelligent man, and his government is pragmatic and intelligent. The problem will be whether being pragmatic and intelligent is going to be enough to cope with what will involve a rethinking of how politics is undertaken. What should be the relationship of the state to industry? What should be the relationship of the state to the public service, and so on? And the problem is that that you can see in the kind of some of the histrionics, as one of the speakers said, of some of the ministers recently, that the French Socialist Party has not really rethought in policy terms, in ideological terms, its own place in French society and politics. And it was interesting, in one of his final speeches of his campaign, François Hollande said, you know, we the left, we've waited 10 years, we've struggled 10 years, we've been debating 10 years, and now we have arrived. Now, none of that is actually true, because for the last 10 years, the French Socialist Party did not do its rethinking like New Labour did, like the German SPD did. decades before, and so on. So the French Socialist Party has arrived in power, and it has an awful lot of power throughout in the Senate, the regions, the National Assembly, the presidency, and so on. It's arrived in power, but it has arrived in power with some intelligent and pragmatic people, but no real rethink about what they are going to do, as one of your speakers said, any different from what Nicolas Sarkozy has been trying to do over the last 5 years. And so it would be so much more reassuring if a different kind of modernized socialism had come to power with a new way of thinking about industrial relations, relationships between the state and industries in crisis, and so on and so on. But one gets the feeling that Hollande knows that change will have to come, but whether they can, it's a bit like turning a tank around. It takes an awful long time with changing French policy and practice between the state and industry. And I wonder whether they're going to make it in time before the problems that will really start pouring in from September. They're already pouring in kind of, under the bar. So
well, quite.
We'll
I mean, we saw the problems that Sarkozy had when he tried to roll down the retirement age. I mean, if Hollande is going to have to make much bigger changes in the autumn, we can expect some big clashes, can't we?
But if I can just add something to that point about sort of the modernizing left, I just don't know. I don't know yet where the Hollande government stands in that, because during the campaign we would get a lot of off-the-record briefings with various economic advisors to him, and a lot of them talking to us would sound completely like the sort of modernized, sort of leftist liberals, economic liberals that you find in Germany, that you find in Britain, that you find in Italy. I don't know whether they were giving us that story because they knew that we were, an Anglophone foreign, newswire, and therefore that's what we wanted to hear. So that's what they were telling us, because it certainly was the opposite of what Hollande was saying on the stump. So I just don't know which one was the real view, or whether we are going to see some economic modernization because that's what they think is best for France, but they just didn't want to say it during the election, or whether the frankly rather 20-year-old Mitterrand-sounding slogans that we often heard on the stump is really the real thing. I don't know. I don't know. I wish I had an answer, but I think we'll know after the vacations.
All right. Well, let's come back to that point in a moment. We have to take a short break right now. When we come back, we'll have all the latest international headlines for you and the second part of our debate. Don't go away.